They thought they could take everything from me, my husband's insurance money, but they didn't know I had one final move left. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. When David passed away suddenly, I felt like my whole world had collapsed. He wasn't just my husband, he was my partner in everything, the person who had always stood by me. Losing him was unbearable, but discovering the betrayal made it even worse. Mark, his business partner, and Lisa, his cousin, had found a way to redirect his life insurance payout to themselves. They smiled and acted like everything was normal, but behind closed doors, they had taken what was ours without a single thought about the life we had built together. I couldn't believe it at first. I kept asking myself, how could they do this? How could people who claimed to care about David do something so cruel? I felt the sting of betrayal deep in my heart. Friends tried to comfort me, but no words could ease the anger and grief building inside me. I knew I couldn't just sit and watch them enjoy the money my husband had earned with his hard work. I started looking through David's documents, trying to make sense of what had happened. Every paper, every file I opened reminded me of him and the life we had planned together. That's when I found it, a clause in his insurance policy that I had never noticed before. It wasn't something they could easily see either. This clause was specific, detailed, and powerful. It said that anyone who tried to manipulate or steal the insurance funds could face serious legal consequences and lose all their assets. My heart raced as I read it. This was my chance, the move I needed to reclaim what was ours. I spent the next few days planning carefully. I couldn't let anger make me careless. I gathered evidence of Mark and Lisa's actions, documented everything meticulously, and made sure I understood every part of the legal process. I had to be smart. If I rushed or made a mistake, they might get away with it. The more I dug, the clearer it became how much they had tried to cover their tracks, but nothing was hidden from me. Every night, I thought about David and the life we had dreamed of. I thought about the promises he made and the trust he gave to people who didn't deserve it. That trust had been broken, but I was determined to make things right. The betrayal hurt, but it also gave me focus. I knew what I had to do, and nothing could stop me from reclaiming justice. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in cases like ours. I explained everything and showed all the evidence I had collected. She listened carefully, nodded, and confirmed what I had hoped: the clause was enforceable, and we could act against Mark and Lisa. I felt a wave of relief mixed with determination. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since David's death, I felt a sense of control, a sense of purpose. I couldn't wait for the moment when the truth would come to light, and when the people who had thought they could get away with betrayal would finally face the consequences. David deserved justice, and I wasn't going to stop until it was done. This was just the beginning of a fight that I knew I had to win. The pain of losing David was already unbearable, but what came next made it almost impossible to breathe. As I went through emails, bank statements, and business files, the shocking truth slowly came into focus. Mark and Lisa hadn't just acted out of opportunity, they had been planning this for years. Every friendly gesture, every offer to help David with his work, had been a lie. They were playing a part, carefully building my trust and his, all while secretly plotting to take everything he had worked so hard for. It was hard to process. How could someone so close, someone we trusted, betray us so completely? I felt the weight of isolation pressing down on me. With David gone, I had no one to turn to. Friends offered sympathy, but they couldn't feel the deep sting of betrayal, the sense that our lives had been quietly invaded while we thought we were safe. Mark and Lisa had not only taken money, they had taken my sense of security, my peace of mind, and the trust one had placed in people I thought were family. I remembered how Mark would always volunteer to handle certain business deals, insisting he knew the best way to invest or save. Lisa had always been around too, casually checking in on David's projects or offering advice. At the time, it had seemed normal, helpful even. But now, every word, every gesture felt tainted. They had been building a web, a carefully concealed plan to siphon off David's insurance payout and leave me with nothing. I could almost see it clearly, the pattern of manipulation that had been in play for years. The realization hit me like a wave. I felt anger, sadness, and disbelief all at once. My husband's life, his efforts, and his dreams had been targeted by the very people who should have cared about him. I felt a deep sense of violation, not just because of the money, but because of the betrayal itself. The people we trusted the most had chosen greed over loyalty, and I was left to face the aftermath alone. Even in my shock, I knew I had to think clearly. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I had to understand the full scope of what Mark and Lisa had done. Every transaction, every meeting, every seemingly innocent conversation suddenly took on a new meaning. It became clear that their actions were not random or opportunistic, they were calculated. They had been waiting for the right moment, the moment when David was gone, to move in and claim everything. Despite the isolation and betrayal, I felt a spark of determination. I knew I couldn't undo the past, but I could control what happened next. I had to protect what was left and make sure that those who had betrayed us faced the consequences. I had lost my husband, but I refused to lose my dignity, my home, and the life we had built together. The shock of betrayal was raw, but it also ignited something inside me, a fierce need for justice. I promised myself I would expose their deceit and reclaim what was ours. It was time to turn grief into strength, anger into strategy, and betrayal into a battle I was ready to fight. The path ahead was daunting, but I knew one thing: I would not let Mark and Lisa win. The days after discovering the betrayal were the hardest I had ever faced. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't eat, and most nights, sleep felt impossible. My mind kept replaying memories of David, his laughter, his advice, the way he trusted people. The thought of how he would have felt knowing his own partner and cousin had stolen from him was unbearable. Anger and sadness were constantly tangled together, and no matter how much I tried to push them aside, they lingered like a shadow I couldn't escape. Friends reached out to me, offering support and kind words, but nothing seemed to reach the core of the pain. They suggested forgiveness, moving on, or letting time heal the wound. I wanted to believe them, but forgiveness felt impossible. This wasn't a simple mistake or misunderstanding. It was a calculated betrayal that destroyed my sense of security and stole what was rightfully ours. Every time I tried to imagine forgiving Mark and Lisa, I felt a surge of anger that made it clear justice was the only path. I found myself pacing the house, going through documents, rereading letters, emails, and transactions. Each detail reminded me of what we had lost and how cleverly they had hidden their actions. I felt a mix of grief for losing David and fury for the deceit that had followed his death. The emotional weight was suffocating at times, but I also realized it was shaping me, giving me clarity and focus. I could let the pain consume me, or I could channel it into action. Memories of David kept returning, and with them, the determination to honor his life and protect what he had worked for. I remembered how he had always been meticulous, careful, and honest. He had trusted people to do the right thing, and now it was my responsibility to carry that forward. The injustice of losing everything to their greed made the need for action even stronger. Even when exhaustion overtook me, I couldn't stop thinking about the next steps. I had to make a plan, not in haste, but with precision. The anger that burned inside me was no longer just pain, it was fuel. I realized that to fight back successfully, I had to remain strong, organized, and relentless. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, honor, and proving that betrayal wouldn't win. In quiet moments, tears came easily. But after the tears, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I promised myself that I wouldn't let grief paralyze me or let their deceit destroy our legacy. I would take back what was ours, piece by piece, and I would make sure Mark and Lisa faced the consequences of their actions. Their betrayal had tested me, but it had also awakened a strength I didn't know I had. I wasn't ready to give up, and forgiveness would have to wait, justice would come first. As I continued sorting through David's papers, I stumbled upon something I had never noticed before, a small, almost hidden clause in his insurance policy. At first, it didn't make sense, but as I read it carefully, my heart started racing. The clause was clear: if anyone attempted to fraudulently claim the insurance money, all their assets could be seized, and they could be held fully accountable. It was specific, legal, and powerful, exactly what I needed to fight back against Mark and Lisa. I couldn't believe I had missed it earlier. For years, David had handled everything meticulously, and this clause was his safeguard against people who might betray him. Suddenly, the anger and despair I had been carrying felt different. It turned into hope. This was the opportunity one had been waiting for, the way to make things right. I felt a surge of determination that pushed away some of the grief that had weighed me down for so long. I read the clause over and over, making sure I fully understood it. Every sentence was a tool, a weapon in the fight against the people who had taken so much from us. It explained exactly what steps needed to be taken to enforce it, and the consequences for anyone who tried to manipulate the payout. It wasn't just about getting the money back, it was about holding them accountable for the betrayal and making sure they couldn't escape the consequences. Immediately, I started imagining the possibilities. Mark and Lisa had thought they were untouchable. They had no idea that David had protected us with this clause, no idea that I could use it to turn the tables completely. My mind raced with plans and strategies, thinking about the right steps to take, the evidence I needed, and the legal support required to enforce it. The anger that had burned inside me now had direction. I felt a mix of adrenaline and fear. I had never faced anything like this before, and the weight of responsibility was immense. But alongside that fear, I also felt clarity. This wasn't just a chance for revenge, it was a chance to restore what was ours, to honor David's life and his efforts, and to show that betrayal would not go unpunished. Every detail mattered, and I was determined to handle it perfectly. That night, I couldn't sleep, thinking about the next steps. I reviewed all the documents, lined up the evidence of Mark and Lisa's actions, and planned how to approach a lawyer who could help me enforce the clause. The realization that justice was within reach gave me a strength I hadn't felt since David passed. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a sense of control over the situation. The clause was more than just words on paper, it was my lifeline, my path to justice, and the key to reclaiming our life. I knew that using it would change everything. Mark and Lisa had underestimated us, underestimated me, and soon they would learn that betrayal has consequences. This was my moment, and I was ready to take it. Once I understood the power of the clause, I knew I couldn't rush into anything. Every decision had to be exact, every action controlled. I began by gathering all the documents that showed what Mark and Lisa had done. I organized emails, bank transfers, policy statements, and every small detail that proved they had taken David's insurance money through deceit. I spent hours going through files, making sure nothing was missing. When I finally felt confident with the evidence, I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud. She listened closely as I explained everything and showed her the clause David had included. She immediately understood its strength. She told me that if we followed the steps correctly, Mark and Lisa wouldn't be able to escape the consequences. Hearing that gave me more confidence, and I felt like the ground beneath me was becoming steady again. Together, we reviewed each piece of evidence and created a plan. The lawyer explained the legal procedure and how to activate the clause without alerting them too early. If Mark or Lisa found out what I was doing, they might try to hide assets or prepare a defense. I couldn't allow that. So, we worked quietly, making sure everything stayed hidden until the exact moment we needed to strike. I made sure my daily routine looked normal. I didn't change my behavior around anyone who might tell them what I was doing. Inside, I was burning with determination, but outside, I stayed calm, polite, and distant. I couldn't risk them sensing anything. Their arrogance worked in my favor, they believed they had already won, and they saw no reason to be suspicious. The lawyer filed the necessary paperwork step by step, each document prepared with precision. I signed forms, answered questions, and provided every detail she needed. The process was long and emotionally draining, but every moment felt like progress. I kept reminding myself that this was for David and for the life we had built together. At home, I continued reviewing the files, looking for anything we might have missed. I wanted the case to be airtight. I couldn't let their betrayal end with them keeping what wasn't theirs. Every night, I sat with David's papers, thinking about how carefully he had planned to protect us. It was his foresight that gave me strength. The closer we got to activating the clause, the more focused I became. The fear that had once overwhelmed me slowly turned into determination. I felt myself becoming stronger, more certain, and ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about standing up for what was right and making sure their betrayal didn't define the rest of my life. By the time everything was ready, I felt prepared. Quietly, patiently, I had built my case. All that was left was the moment when the clause would be triggered, and Mark and Lisa would finally face what they had tried so hard to escape. I kept my plan hidden, knowing that the impact would be even greater when they realized they had been caught completely off guard. I arranged a meeting with Mark and Lisa, pretending I wanted to settle things quietly. I acted calm and polite, keeping my emotions in check, even though inside, I was burning with anger and determination. They didn't suspect anything. They walked in confident, smiling, and full of arrogance, believing they had already won. As soon as they started talking, it became clear how smug they felt. They bragged about how clever they had been, how easily they had taken David's money, and how nothing could touch them now. Listening to them talk about their victory made my stomach twist with anger, but I stayed composed. I couldn't let a single expression give away what I was planning. I nodded, asked questions, and acted interested, all while hiding the storm inside me. Every word they said, every boast, only confirmed how overconfident they were. They had no idea that I had already filed the legal papers to enforce David's insurance clause. Every claim they made, every plan they boasted about, was already being undone by the law. I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing the truth and watching them remain oblivious. During the meeting, I carefully guided the conversation, asking about their plans and pretending to consider compromise. They were happy to reveal everything, thinking I had no proof and no power. I took mental notes, confirming details, and watching them expose themselves even more. Their arrogance was their weakness, and I used it to my advantage. After the meeting, I stayed composed while inside. The satisfaction of knowing justice was coming gave me energy. I could almost picture the moment the clause would be enforced, when they would realize they had been outsmarted. I had waited patiently, preparing quietly, and now it was almost time to act. That day, I realized how much patience mattered. If I had confronted them too early, they might have hidden assets or tried to manipulate the situation. By waiting, by letting them feel untouchable, I ensured the impact would be complete. Their smugness would be their downfall, and my careful planning would finally pay off. I left the meeting with a calm smile, pretending nothing had happened, but inside I was ready. Every piece of evidence was ready, every legal form filed, and the moment to activate the clause was near. I felt a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction, knowing that soon, their confidence would be shattered. For the first time since David's death, I felt a sense of control. The betrayal that had once made me feel powerless was about to be answered. I had set the trap perfectly, and the people who had stolen from us had walked right into it, completely unaware of the consequences that were waiting for them. Everything was in place. Mark and Lisa believed they had won, but they didn't know that their so-called victory was about to end, and the life they had tried to take from us would be restored in full. The day finally came when I was ready to activate the clause. I woke up early, my heart racing, knowing that everything I had planned for weeks was about to take effect. I had double-checked every document, every piece of evidence, and confirmed with my lawyer that every step was in place. There was no room for mistakes. Once the clause was officially activated, the consequences were immediate. Mark and Lisa received notifications that their bank accounts were frozen, properties were seized, and their businesses were under investigation. I knew they had thought they were untouchable, but now the reality of what they had done hit them like a storm. Their shock and disbelief were exactly what I had anticipated. They couldn't believe it. Mark called Lisa repeatedly, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Lisa panicked, pacing back and forth, realizing that all their careful planning and stolen money meant nothing against the legal power of the clause. They had underestimated me, underestimated my determination and intelligence, and now they were paying the price. I remember sitting quietly at home, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. Months of grief, anger, and careful planning had led to this point. Watching the news of their frozen accounts and seized properties confirmed that justice was finally being served. The people who had thought they could steal from us were now powerless, facing the consequences of their betrayal. Every phone call they made, every meeting they attended, was now overshadowed by the clause. Lawyers, banks, and authorities were all involved, and there was no way for them to escape. Their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that I could fight back, and now they were forced to face the full weight of what they had done. I felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. Relief that justice was being served, and satisfaction that the people who had hurt us so deeply were finally being held accountable. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, trust, and proving that betrayal could not go unpunished. Even in their panic, I stayed calm. I didn't need to watch them suffer in anger, the law and the clause were doing the work for me. Their shock was complete, and I knew there was no way they could recover what they had taken. By the end of the day, the full effect of the clause was clear. Mark and Lisa were facing serious consequences, their plans completely unraveled, and their sense of power destroyed. I felt a wave of closure, knowing that everything I had worked for, everything David had protected us for, was now being restored. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of peace. The betrayal had been answered, the injustice corrected, and the life we had fought for was safe once again. The activation of the clause had done more than reclaim our money, it had restored justice, honor, and strength to my life. After the clause was activated, I watched as Mark and Lisa's carefully built world started to crumble. Their arrogance, their smirks, their confidence, all of it vanished. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about the truth coming out, and the people who had tried to take everything from me were finally facing the consequences of their actions. Their panic and confusion were clear for everyone to see, and it was undeniable that justice was being served. Seeing them struggle, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense, it was about making sure the betrayal they had committed was corrected. For so long, I had carried grief, anger, and fear, but now those feelings began to shift. I felt lighter, more focused, and stronger. The people who had doubted me, who had thought I couldn't handle the situation, were now watching a different reality unfold. Friends and neighbors, who had once offered sympathy but expressed doubt about whether I could fight back, now came to me with admiration. They saw the courage it took to face such betrayal and the determination it required to take precise action. Some whispered about how calm I had remained while Mark and Lisa fell apart, while others openly praised the way I had handled everything. Their respect didn't matter as much as the fact that I had proven to myself what I was capable of. As I reflected on the situation, I realized that the clause had done more than recover what was ours. It had restored balance and integrity to a situation that had felt completely unfair. I had honored David's memory by following the plan he had left behind and making sure that his trust in me, and in the system he had created, was not wasted. Every step I had taken was a way to protect what he had built, to respect his life, and to ensure that justice was done in his name. Watching Mark and Lisa struggle, I also felt a sense of closure. The betrayal that had haunted me, that had kept me awake at night and filled my mind with anger, no longer had power over me. I didn't feel hatred anymore, I felt relief and strength. They had underestimated me, underestimated my patience, and underestimated my resolve, and now the outcome proved how wrong they were. I took time to reflect on what had happened, to acknowledge my own courage and the careful planning that had led to this moment. This wasn't easy, it had required endurance, clarity, and focus. But it had been worth it. I had reclaimed control, ensured justice, and honored the life of the man I loved. By the end of it all, my heart felt lighter. The storm of grief and anger had calmed, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and peace. David's memory was honored, the betrayal had been corrected, and I had proven to myself, and to everyone who had doubted me, that strength, intelligence, and determination could overcome even the deepest acts of deceit. Justice had been served, and it felt right. After everything had settled, I took time to reflect on the journey I had been through. losing David had felt like losing myself. The grief was heavy, the betrayal crushing, and at times, I wasn't sure if I could continue. But looking back now, I realized that the pain, the anger, and the struggle had shaped me into someone stronger than I had ever known. I had faced the worst of betrayal and survived, and in the process, I discovered a resilience I didn't realize I possessed. The experience taught me that betrayal, no matter how deep, doesn't have to destroy you. It can either break you completely or push you to find strength and courage you never knew existed. For me, it became the latter. Every moment of fear, every sleepless night, and every plan I carefully executed reminded me that I was capable of more than I had imagined. The challenge forced me to think clearly, act decisively, and remain patient, even when my emotions threatened to take over. I also realized the importance of trust and boundaries. David's betrayal by the people closest to him, and indirectly to me, was a harsh lesson that not everyone deserves a place in your life. I vowed that from that day forward, I would be more careful about who I trusted, more aware of intentions, and more determined to protect myself and my family. The experience had shown me that being strong isn't just about fighting back, it's also about recognizing risks and acting wisely before others can take advantage. At the same time, I felt proud of how I had handled everything. I hadn't let grief or anger control me. I hadn't acted recklessly or out of revenge alone. I had stayed focused, used my intelligence, and followed a plan that honored David's memory. That combination of strength and patience made the victory even sweeter. It wasn't just about reclaiming what was stolen, it was about proving to myself that I could rise above hardship and emerge stronger, smarter, and more resilient. I also thought about the future and what mattered most to me now. David's memory, my family, and the life we had built together were treasures I would always protect. No one would manipulate me or take advantage of me again. I promised myself that I would continue to act with integrity, courage, and determination, always keeping in mind the lessons learned from this painful chapter. Looking back, I understood that the journey had changed me forever. It had been painful, exhausting, and emotionally draining, but it had also been empowering. I had faced betrayal, navigated loss, and turned grief into action. I had found strength, clarity, and courage. From this point forward, I knew I would never allow anyone to manipulate me again. I would stand firm, protect what mattered most, and honor the lessons that life had forced me to learn. With the ordeal behind me, I focused on using the remaining insurance money wisely. My first priority was securing my family's future. I made sure our home, savings, and investments were protected so that we would never have to worry about financial stability again. The betrayal had taught me how fragile security could be, and I wanted to make sure my loved ones were safe from anything like this ever happening again. Once my family was secure, I thought about how many others might be going through similar situations, people being taken advantage of, betrayed, or defrauded. I decided to use part of the money to start a small foundation to help victims of financial fraud. The goal was simple: provide guidance, support, and legal assistance to those who didn't know where to turn. I wanted to make sure that others wouldn't feel as helpless as I had felt after discovering Mark and Lisa's betrayal. Setting up the foundation gave me a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about reclaiming what was stolen from us, it was about making something positive out of the pain. I wanted my experience to help others, to turn a story of loss and betrayal into one of strength and empowerment. Every time I spoke with someone who had been deceived or helped them understand their legal options, I felt that part of the anger and grief had been transformed into something meaningful. Looking back, I realized that everything I had gone through had taught me invaluable lessons. I had learned about patience, strategy, and the importance of staying calm under pressure. I had discovered a resilience I never knew I had, and I had found the courage to stand up for myself and my family. Most importantly, I had learned that being wrong doesn't have to mean being defeated. It can be the very thing that pushes you to rise stronger than before. Now, when I think about what happened, I no longer feel anger or fear. Instead, I feel pride in what I accomplished, pride in the way I handled the betrayal, and pride in the life I am building for my family. Mark and Lisa's actions could have destroyed me, but instead, they revealed the strength I carried inside. My message to anyone watching this story is clear: never underestimate a person who has been wronged. They may fall, they may grieve, and they may feel powerless, but if they use their pain wisely, they can rise stronger than ever. Strength often comes from the most difficult experiences, and courage is forged in moments of injustice. Through all of this, I learned that justice, resilience, and determination are more powerful than fear, betrayal, or greed. I honored David's memory not just by reclaiming what was ours, but by turning the experience into a force for good. I hope that anyone facing hardship can find the same strength, rise above their challenges, and use their experiences to create something meaningful, just as I have done.